Welcome to another episode of ACLU on the Hill. Today we're joined by Deputy Legal Director Jason Groth to tell us about a bill, HB 257, that he's been working on for a couple of weeks now, including publishing an op-ed just about this bill. We'll throw that op-ed up there. You can take a look at it. We'll have the link later on. But Jason, this bill is coming up for a hearing. Can you tell us what the ACLU is on it?
Yeah, so this HB 257 originally had a lot of language about removing discretion or the ability for prosecutors to make meaningful choices in cases. So reduced a lot of their options and would have forced prosecutors to often bring the most severe charges without the ability to look at a case and honestly reflect on whether or not this is the best course of action, right? And prosecutors do this all the time. It's part of their ethical duties to make sure that they're making correct charging decisions. And what that previous language in that bill, the first version of the bill would have done, would have really forced their hands to kind of make them into like legal automatons, where they have not a lot of choice in the matter before them as to like how they want to proceed, right? So it would anger them away from being able to do things like diversion, where you can get a case, look at it, and decide this person shouldn't be prosecuted at all. Let's do some programming to help the underlying issues and get them out of the criminal legal system. Because often when you get pulled in, it actually makes chances of recidivating and committing crimes later on more likely. So get them out of the system early, and it's also less costly that way. Also to make reduced charging decisions that more appropriately fit the context, right? Looking at kind of the gradient of things that are kicking around in that individual's life, in the victim's life, listening to the requests of both victims, those advocates, as well as kind of common sense decision making. And so that was the first version of that bill.
And how did it change with the substitute that's going to be heard in committee?
So a lot of it got gutted. I mean, we assume that the substitute will be proposed and adopted tomorrow. There's no guarantee. We see sometimes bills show up that have a substitute listed, but they never get adopted and they get passed. But the substitute guts a lot of the previous language and essentially pares down from this discussion about kind of a whole revamp of prosecutorial discretion or the ability to make those meaningful choices. It also had previous language about diversion programming and how that can get funded or not funded, and who gets to make approval for programming decisions. And now the substitute just looks at whether or not prosecutors can take something that would be a felony and then decide to reduce that charge and file it as a misdemeanor, as a B or C misdemeanor, instead of a felony or Class A misdemeanor.
You've got a good example of why that type of flexibility is important. Can you walk us through like a hypothetical where it could be charged as a felony, but it absolutely makes no sense, and the prosecutor needs this flexibility?
Yeah, definitely. And this is like, kind of one of those thought experiments that sounds maybe kind of outlandish, but in my previous work as a criminal defense attorney, it actually happened in a case that one of my colleagues was on. And in that case, somebody had a cell phone out, like this one that's kind of blurry, but I think you can see it, was filming somebody, and the other individual was grumpy about it, didn't like being filmed, and they smacked that other person's hand, hit the cell phone goes flying away from the person holding it, and then that person got prosecuted for robbery, right? So using force to take away something from somebody else, even if it's temporarily taken away, right? And so technically, you could shoehorn that sort of incident under Utah law as a robbery, as a Class 2 felony. And then a prosecutor looking at those facts and the circumstances wouldn't be able to say, this actually isn't quite a robbery, right? This doesn't really make a lot of sense. This isn't a common sense decision to charge this as a felony. They couldn't do that. They couldn't bring it down to something like a property crime, like a Class B or C misdemeanor, or like some sort of assault or harassment. They'd be forced to charge that felony. Which I think for a lot of people, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a waste of time and resources. And I think if you get that in front of a jury is probably just gonna be like, what are we doing here? This is just silly nonsense. And you'd probably get an acquittal on that sort of factual circumstance. And so here, it still really squeezes prosecutors to maybe make some pretty problematic decisions or lack of making decisions down the road.
So flexibility is a key component of our criminal legal system, especially when it comes to prosecutors making decisions. This bill still, even with the substitute, takes away that flexibility. I presume the ACLU of Utah opposes this bill. Is that correct?
We do, and I think that's one of the interesting things is that when we talk about the power of prosecutors, it's something we've been talking about through our campaign for smart justice since 2018. And we talk about a lot of the bad things that can happen with prosecutors using their discretion in problematic ways, such as overcharging and asking for absurd bail amounts, that sort of thing. But they can also do some really good, powerful work. We always refer to the prosecutors as the most powerful actor in the criminal legal system. And it's because they can do a lot of, it's a double-edged sword, right? They can do a lot of really good things when they have cases in front of them to make good charging decisions. And when we think about justice, we should think about that holistically. What's good for the community, what's good for the individual that's being accused of a crime, what's good for the victim. And when we start squeezing out their discretion or their ability to make common sense decisions, we really start getting away from justice, and we get to this really rote sort of robotic way of thinking about the criminal legal system. And I think a lot of people would be very uncomfortable if we used algorithms to decide how we should proceed with cases.
Great. Well, thanks for walking us through HB 257. We're going to put up the link to your op-ed, which appeared in the Salt Lake Tribune not too long ago, which actually makes the case for elections and letting the voters really decide how prosecutors should be doing their job, because they can vote them in, they can vote them out. Thank you, Jason, for telling us all about HB 257. We'll look forward to seeing how it goes in the Utah legislature.
Thanks, Jason.